You sit down on a pristine white porcelain toilet in the middle of the night, surrounded by the comforting, safe hum of an exhaust fan. It is a private, sterile sanctuary. But for 99.9% of human history, this perfectly safe little box simply did not exist anywhere on Earth. Instead, answering nature's call meant stepping out into a freezing, pitch-black forest, your skin shivering as you squatted vulnerably in the damp, terrifying wilderness, constantly scanning the shadows with a racing heart for deadly predators. This is exactly why APE2 Legend exists, one ancestral secret every week. Hit subscribe and stay on the journey. How did our ancient ancestors actually keep themselves clean and survive these nightly terrors when toilet paper and plumbing were hundreds of thousands of years away? Today, we are absolutely obsessed with total sanitation, scrubbing every surface with harsh chemicals to violently eradicate 99.9% of all invisible microscopic bacteria. We assume early humans must have been entirely covered in filth, suffering constantly from terrible hygiene and devastating diseases caused by their own biological waste. But anthropologists and fossil records reveal a shocking truth that shatters our modern assumptions. Ancient hunter-gatherers were surprisingly adept at managing their bodily functions safely. Their primary survival strategy was breathtakingly simple but incredibly effective. They simply walked away. For hundreds of millennia, humans were constantly moving, nomadic foragers. By never staying in one place for too long, a small tribe naturally abandoned their waste far behind them, completely breaking the cycle of contamination. The vast, open prehistoric environment acted as an infinite, self-cleaning recycling system, instantly absorbing and neutralizing the scattered biological footprint of a tiny roaming band. They did not build massive, festering piles of garbage or sewage like the crowded, disease-ridden medieval cities that would eventually follow the agricultural revolution. However, just walking away only solved the communal problem. They still faced the intensely personal challenge of physically cleaning their own bodies after every single trip. Without the luxury of soft, engineered paper, early humans had to rely entirely on whatever the immediate local landscape offered them during their desperate moments. Depending on the harsh climate they inhabited, this meant grabbing handfuls of dry grass, large broad leaves, rough stones, or even handfuls of freezing snow. While a large, soft leaf might sound like a somewhat acceptable natural alternative to your modern toilet paper, it was never a guaranteed luxury. The reality of foraging for foliage in the wild was fraught with extreme danger. Grab the wrong plant and you could face agonizing, blistering rashes. If you lived in colder, northern climates where soft, broad leaves were scarce, your desperate ancestors relied heavily on handfuls of thick, damp moss. Moss is highly absorbent and naturally contains trace amounts of iodine, making it surprisingly hygienic. But what about during the brutal, freezing Ice Age winters? Your only option was often a fresh handful of freezing snow. It was certainly a numbing shock, but incredibly effective at preventing bacterial buildup. However, if your tribe migrated to a dry, arid desert or a rocky coastal region, soft leaves and snow were entirely out of the question. In these harsh environments, your ancestors used smooth river stones, handfuls of abrasive sand, or carefully selected clamshells to scrape themselves completely clean. It sounds unimaginably painful to your pampered modern body today, but callous skin and tough natural materials were just an ordinary, daily prehistoric reality. As nomadic tribes eventually grew into larger settled civilizations, this deeply personal challenge evolved into a massive, organized public health crisis requiring strange inventions. Enter the powerful Roman Empire, famous for its advanced public bathhouses and sprawling communal latrines built directly over flowing channels of continuous wastewater. But instead of modern privacy, you sat intimately shoulder to shoulder with dozens of strangers, engaging in casual daily conversation while answering nature's most urgent call. And the most shocking historical truth? To clean up, you used a single, shared communal tool called a xylospongium, a natural sea sponge attached to a stick. After you finished using it, you simply rinsed the dirty sponge in a shallow gutter of running salt water, cheerfully leaving it for the next person. Sharing a wet toilet sponge with 50 complete strangers seems like a guaranteed fast track to a deadly bacterial infection for your fragile modern immune system. Yet, these ancient populations somehow survived. Their resilient immune systems were intensely battle-tested, constantly exposed to a biological environment that was never sterilized by harsh chemicals. But if their immune systems were so incredibly tough, why does your modern stomach instantly churn and squirm when you smell a foul public restroom? Your intense physical reaction is not a weakness. It is a highly sophisticated, 300,000-year-old biological alarm system wired directly into your primal brain. Evolutionary psychologists call this pathogen avoidance behavior. That overwhelming feeling of profound disgust is essentially an ancient antivirus software designed to keep you alive. Long before the invention of microscopes or germ theory, this powerful, sickening revulsion physically forced your prehistoric ancestors to avoid deadly biological hazards. So the next time you violently gag at a terrible odor, thank your ancient brain for aggressively protecting your fragile body from invisible threats. However, despite this built-in disgust alarm, our ancestors were definitely not parasite-free. Archaeologists have uncovered a fascinating, albeit slightly gross, biological time capsule. By carefully excavating and analyzing coprolites, which are literally fossilized ancient human feces, scientists can actually reconstruct the exact microscopic ecosystems inside prehistoric stomachs. These preserved coprolite samples consistently reveal a startling biological reality. Ancient humans were absolutely crawling with various intestinal parasites, tapeworms, and microscopic hitchhikers. To your modern, hypersanitized mind, having worms sounds like a terrifying medical emergency. But for them, it was just an ordinary part of daily life. Your ancestors' immune systems were engaged in a continuous, low-level war with these biological invaders, keeping the body's defenses constantly active and incredibly robust. The parasites never entirely destroyed the host, and the host never entirely destroyed the parasites. It was a bizarre, delicate microscopic truce forged over millennia. This constant internal struggle actually trained the ancient immune system, teaching it exactly how to distinguish between genuine, deadly threats and harmless environmental dust. But today, you swallow antibiotics and scrub your hands with alcohol, completely wiping out this ancient, complex internal ecosystem in a matter of seconds. According to the hygiene hypothesis, this sudden lack of microscopic enemies leaves your deeply bored immune system desperately searching for a new target to attack. Deprived of ancient parasites to fight, your heavily armed biological defenses often turn against completely harmless things like pollen, peanuts, or even your own body. So, when did our relationship with our own waste turn into a deadly, festering nightmare? The answer lies exactly 12,000 years ago. You stopped constantly walking. You put down your nomadic spear, picked up a heavy wooden hoe, and built the very first permanent agricultural settlements. But settling down meant one horrific reality. You could no longer simply walk away from your biological footprint. You were now trapped with it. In ancient megavillages like Catalhoyuk, thousands of humans lived shoulder to shoulder, completely suffocated by the rapidly accumulating mountains of their own daily bodily waste. You also brought domesticated animals inside your walls. Mixing animal filth with human waste created a terrifying, explosive breeding ground for brand new diseases. To survive this suffocating nightmare, humanity was forced to invent the earliest primitive toilets. Essentially just deep, dark holes dug directly into the earth. You squatted over these festering cesspits, hoping to bury the problem. But burying it only allowed invisible pathogens to slowly seep into your drinking water. As anthropologist Jared Diamond famously argued, adopting agriculture might have been the absolute worst mistake in the entire history of the human race. When scientists examine the fossilized bones of early farmers, they constantly find horrifying evidence of chronic malnutrition, devastating severe infections, and terrible rotting teeth. Compared to the incredibly healthy, athletic hunter-gatherers, these early civilized pioneers were heavily diseased, significantly shorter in stature, and constantly plagued by terrible intestinal parasites. By locking yourself permanently inside four walls, you accidentally built a biological prison. The horrifying diseases we fear today were born right here. The terrifying bubonic plague, deadly cholera, and typhus. None of these devastating nightmares existed when your ancestors were freely roaming the wild, open African savanna. Your modern, obsessive fear of germs doesn't actually come from the deep prehistoric ice age. It comes directly from this dense, filthy agricultural trauma. Your brain deeply remembers the horrific historical plagues that slaughtered millions, making you violently scrub your modern toilet to avoid repeating those dark, festering centuries. The truth is, civilized life made us much sicker than nature ever did. No textbook teaches this. PTO legend does every week. To manage this festering urban nightmare, your ancestors had to invent increasingly bizarre ways to physically move their biological waste away from their crowded homes. If you lived in a fortified medieval castle, you used a garderobe, a tiny, cold room jutting precariously out over the massive outer stone walls. You squatted nervously on a simple wooden bench, and your waist would literally freefall dozens of feet directly into the dark, stagnant water below. While this cleverly kept the castle interior smelling fresh, it unfortunately transformed the defensive moat into a horrifying, toxic, and utterly lethal biological hazard. Down in the densely packed, suffocating city streets, ordinary citizens didn't have moats. Their festering waste simply accumulated in deep, overflowing basement cesspits. To survive this suffocating stench, cities relied on night soil men, desperate workers who manually shoveled out these toxic pits under the cover of darkness. You would hear their wooden carts violently clattering down the cobblestones at midnight, hauling mountains of concentrated human feces out to the surrounding farms. This terrifying, deeply unpleasant job was actually one of the first organized public sanitation systems, desperately trying to artificially replicate your ancestors' ancient nomadic habits. They were physically trying to recreate what your prehistoric ancestors did completely naturally on the vast savanna, putting extreme distance between themselves and their waste. But this agricultural recycling loop was fundamentally broken. Using raw human waste to fertilize human food kept the deadly parasite cycle violently spinning indefinitely. Unlike the infinite prehistoric grasslands, a dense medieval city could not magically absorb and neutralize thousands of pounds of daily concentrated biological hazardous material. This devastating, unbroken chain of constant contamination is exactly why horrific historical plagues easily wiped out up to half of the entire European population. Witnessing this unimaginable scale of death, your traumatized ancestors panicked. Humanity swung from living alongside nature to declaring an absolute war on the microscopic world. Your brain aggressively learned to equate any trace of dirt, odor, or natural soil with the terrifying specter of painful, inevitable, and immediate death. This deep evolutionary trauma forced your ancestors to invent harsh chemical bleach, sealed underground sewer pipes, and perfectly sterile white porcelain thrones to isolate themselves. In your desperate quest to escape the horrors of civilized diseases, you successfully transformed your modern home into an incredibly safe, sterile fortress. But deep inside your sterile intestines, this extreme chemical warfare has accidentally created a desolate, starving ghost town where a thriving ecosystem once lived. When modern scientists study the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining traditional hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth, they discover something truly shocking. The Hadza still forage daily in the dirt, eating wild tubers and raw honey without ever obsessively sanitizing their hands or their natural food. Inside their stomachs, researchers found a lush, incredibly diverse microbial rainforest, containing dozens of ancient bacterial strains that modern humans have completely lost. Compared to their bustling internal jungle, your heavily medicated Western digestive tract looks like a barren, chemically scorched desert, stripped of its biological diversity. Because the Hadza still interact intimately with the soil, their immune systems remain perfectly calibrated, constantly sparring with natural microscopic companions without overreacting. This is exactly why these foraging populations experience almost zero cases of modern autoimmune diseases, severe allergies, or chronic inflammatory bowel conditions. Meanwhile, your modern body is desperately crying out for these missing microscopic friends, starved of the vital biological data that dirt used to provide. Every time you compulsively swallow antibiotics or slather your skin in harsh antibacterial gels, you are carpet bombing your own ancient evolutionary allies. Your brain is not malfunctioning when it triggers severe allergic reactions. It is simply a highly trained army trapped in an empty, sterile room. Without any genuine parasites or natural bacteria to wrestle with, your bored internal defenses start violently attacking your own healthy tissues and harmless foods. You must realize that you are not just a single, isolated organism. You are a walking, breathing ecosystem containing trillions of deeply interconnected organisms. For 300,000 years, you evolved strictly through constant, messy contact with the muddy, breathing world around you, absorbing its microscopic life. By completely severing that ancient physical connection to the Earth, we accidentally triggered a massive, silent extinction event inside our own modern stomachs. But this invisible extinction doesn't just affect your digestion. Emerging science proves that your gut and your brain are intimately, physically connected. When your internal ecosystem becomes a barren wasteland, it sends constant, low-level stress signals directly to your highly sensitive ancient mind. This biological isolation might be one hidden reason why modern humans, despite living in perfectly safe, spotless environments, experience unprecedented anxiety. Today, you sit in absolute privacy behind a locked door, violently scrubbing your hands, staring mindlessly into a glowing screen to distract yourself. Compare that to your ancestor. When they squatted in the dark, they were intensely present, completely dialed into the living world around them. They grabbed a freezing handful of snow or a rough leaf, shivering as the cold bit their skin, feeling every single agonizing sensation. Then they stood up, completely left the danger behind, and walked right back to the warm, glowing safety of the communal campfire. We view our incredible modern plumbing, soft paper, and antibacterial soaps as the absolute peak of human achievement and ultimate triumph over dirty nature. But an evolutionary anthropologist looks at your spotless, bleach-smelling bathroom and sees something entirely different. They see a tragic, desperate overcorrection. We invented these extreme sanitary systems because the agricultural revolution forced us to live surrounded by mountains of our own lethal, concentrated waste. To fix the terrible diseases caused by early civilizations, we aggressively oversanitized the entire world, successfully destroying the bad bacteria but also obliterating the good. So when you suffer from horrible allergies or inexplicable stomach issues, or feel a profound sense of modern anxiety for no apparent reason, remember that your intensely protected, isolated body is actually grieving. It is deeply mourning the loss of a microscopic wilderness it evolved to constantly engage with. Your physical reactions, that powerful disgust at bad smells, that sudden urge to vigorously scrub your hands clean, they are not flaws in your biology at all. They are the loud, echoing voices of survivors. They are the exact ancient instincts that successfully kept your fragile ancestors alive in the dark. For 300,000 brutal years, humanity did not survive by desperately hiding in sterile boxes or fearfully destroying the living environment around them. They survived by constantly moving forward, walking endlessly across the vast savanna, and leaving their deadly biological problems far behind in the dirt. They forged a delicate, complicated truce with the microscopic world, allowing their intensely tested immune systems to learn, adapt, and grow incredibly strong. We can never abandon modern sanitation, but perhaps it is time we finally stop viewing every single speck of natural dirt as a mortal enemy. Maybe we need to slowly invite a little bit of that ancient, messy, microscopic wilderness back into our excessively manicured and painfully lonely modern lives. Because beneath your clean clothes and your chemically scrubbed skin, you are still carrying the exact same primal hardware as a prehistoric hunter-gatherer. When you feel inexplicably disgusted, when your stomach turns in a public space, or when your immune system suddenly overreacts to the modern environment, never forget the core truth of this channel. Your body isn't broken. It's just perfectly remembering 300,000 years of harsh, brilliant survival. So tonight, when you sit down alone on that pristine white porcelain toilet, you aren't just sitting in a completely isolated, perfectly sterile, lonely box. You are taking your rightful place in a massive, unseen circle, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 generations who successfully survived the dark forest. That incredible, ancient story continues inside you right now. Subscribe to APE2 Legend and stay on this fascinating journey to uncover your true origins. From ape to legend, that is the extraordinary story of every human alive today. I will see you all next week.